Welcome to Universal Talk. On today's show, we ponder ego versus spirit, or the blending of the two. Let's present the case. First, we must consider the mind, body, and spirit connection that makes up the human experience. If this is true, then, could we reach our true potential as human beings by simply honoring and blending all facets of the human form together as one? What if the ego mind, the physical body, and the spirit could all be blended to allow for the highest potential of the human experience? What if, through this type of blending, the physical body could transform the very DNA that keeps the physicalness together, so that we could use 100% of the brain instead of 8 to 10%, and 100% of our DNA rather than 3%. In a moment, we'll have Dr. Nickolas Martin, who, as you may remember, is a psychologist, and Reverend Martin, who is an ordained minister, both of which are no strangers to the show. And today is going to be a very special show, as each of us will represent and give our expertise on the mind, the body, and the spirit. So without further ado, Dr. Martin and Reverend Martin, welcome to Universal Talk.
Thank you, Joe.
How are you?
Hi, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, so let's get to it. First of all, this unique partnership that you guys have is really refreshing, actually. So when we talk about the mind-body-spirit connection, and how would you describe your relationship with you being a psychologist, more of the ego mind, and you being more of a metaphysical physician, also a reverend, that speaks of spirituality? How, and I guess I'll go with you first, Reverend. Mm-hmm. How would you describe to the viewers what your relationship is and how things work out between the two of you? It's almost, to me it looks like it would be a compliment to one another, but some people may say it's a contrast or it's an opposite, you know?
I think it's actually both.
Okay.
Because we have learned so much from each other. Mm-hmm. We are, opposites do attract, and we are different personalities. And so I always have been more spiritually based, I guess, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. And I think Nick has been more of the mind. Mm-hmm. So the coming together of the two has been a nice blend, and we have learned how we can take who we are and what we know and have learned through our lives and bring it into the ego spiritualism that mm-hmm. we're working with.
Okay.
When I think of our relationship, the word synergy comes to mind. And based on my background in training as a psychologist, focusing more so on the mind, and Linda's background as a metaphysician focusing on the spirit, I see us as having influenced each other. And I know when I first started writing the book, The Ego Unmasked, my focus was on the more mentalistic and egoistic aspects of our humanity. And then as Linda and I have worked with each other over the years, I began to understand more of the role of the spirituality aspects of our being and how that can impact the ego and vice versa. And that, to me, tremendously shaped the vision and message that is coming forward in the work we're doing, which is probably most briefly described by the term ego spiritualism, which is basically a blending of the humanity and the divinity that we believe exists in all of us.
Mm-hmm. So over the past few years, do you feel that there's been a development between or even a blending with the message that both of you have, where maybe at one time it was a separate message, more spiritual, and you having more ego and you're going different ways, but now there's more of a blending type of a thing?
Definitely. I think we've learned, you know, from mm-hmm. each other as we both grew into who we are, because life is a process of growing. Mm-hmm. And so we went through the shifting of our own egos, you know, and moving hopefully into a more balanced state of being. But as he was writing the book, it was learning also about how these two things need to come together, and mm-hmm. in order for us to be whole, to bring the body, mind, and spirit together, as we always talk about, right. This is what it means. This is what it means to learn about your ego, bring that into balance, because you cannot move into full awareness of your divinity if you don't start with a balanced humanness to begin with.
Yeah, a lot of disciplines and a lot of concepts even try to separate different facets of the human being. And so what do you think, Dr. Martin? Do you think that that's a valid way to go, a direction to go, is the mind, body, spirit connection rather than the separateness of each one?
Absolutely. They're inseparable. They all exist within our being, and to treat them as if they were separate, distinct, and completely apart entities without understanding the effects, again using the word synergy, upon each of them, either for helping each of us become healthier, or in the word I remember you talking about, dis-ease, and the damage that gets done to the physical being when their spirituality is not functioning, or their mental well-being is not functional. So yes, definitely, I don't think you can go any other way, and I think that's part of where we're going in the future, and we're getting to, is to really understand that you have to think in terms of all of them. It's a more complex level of dealing with it, but that's the reality of it, is they're all there. We have to work with them all. Right.
Yeah, a lot of times the separation is easier for the individual to handle, because if you're a subspecialty or just a specialty within a certain genre or discipline, such as psychology, and you only deal with that, to have that facet and focus on that particular concept, I guess you could say, may be a little bit easier for the practitioner who's providing the care, but I think each individual person should at least have the concept of the mind-body-spirit connection so that they can still speak of that. And I think the future, like you say, has to have a blending of all three, the mind, body, spirit. That's what we are as human beings, and we've gotten away from that over the past few years. And you know, a lot of people, as we talked in the past, call it a new age. I really think it's old thinking, but we're bringing this back. And so whether we're here to change medicine this time around and bring things back to simplicity and have the blending of the true human being, the mind, body, spirit, and look at that person and see that if they come in maybe with a psychological disorder, if you will, it might not be psychological, it could be spiritual. But to totally focus on one area without looking at the whole, I think a lot of people miss the boat. What do you think about that?
I agree. I agree, because we're so much more than what we have known ourselves to be. We're so used to dealing with the five senses and what we can see, touch, and feel, and we're much more complex than that. If you had mentioned earlier that we only use a small part of our brain, that's because we still have so much evolving to do, and so we are at this place where we are ready to expand now and bring together all of it we are.
You're familiar with this phrase, and I believe our audience is, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so if you're focusing in only on parts, and you're missing the whole, and the whole is what we're trying to work with and help. Right. And so it makes sense to think in that direction in terms of working with the mind, the body, and the spirit jointly, not separately.
Right. You know, coming back to what Reverend Martin was saying, do you feel like at this particular time in history that this is humanity's best chance or greatest potential to reach that consciousness? And the reason I say that is I've had several other guests on the show that speak of this unity consciousness that's being emitted through the center of our universe. And scientifically, this is proven that there is a black hole, there is energies that are being emitted, there are sun flares that are happening, and all the Earth changes. So scientifically, if you do the research, you can see that there's some changes that are going on. And whether we call it, you know, global warming just from this planet, or whether we look at it more of a holistic view of the universe, again, instead of just the Earth. And I think that the evolution, not just of man, but the universe as a whole, this planet and all other species, I think that maybe right now, because of what's happening with the universe right now, I think that there's a potential for growth if people open up, and not just people, just even the simplest things. you know, animals and all that. I mean, what do you think of that concept from other people that have been on the show?
Right. We're definitely in a place of, we're shifting. We're moving into an opportunity to create and evolve into what we're heading to be. The Earth does not act alone, just as one part of us does not act alone. The Earth is part of a whole, the whole of the universe, and there's so much more to the universe than what we know. But we're all shifting and evolving into this new consciousness of being, the Earth included, as well as the universe. And it's looking at everything as being a living entity that has a divine intelligence, that is preparing and moving towards this.
How has this consciousness changed your viewpoint from the days of going to school for psychology? Has anything evolved in your mind, your ego mind, that says, oh wow, you know, we used to think that this person, if they had these symptoms, they were considered bipolar, crazy, whatever. Now with this unity consciousness theory that's out and all the energies that are emitted, how does that change your viewpoint? Do you know about this?
I think what I've been learning, and this learning is more so than from books, but from people that I've encountered over the last 32 years of my work, people have probably did more to educate me and broaden my understanding in regards to what's going on within them and what's affecting them. And the one major thing they've taught me is about the importance of the ego with regard to the humanity part of our being, and how we need to work with that in a better way than maybe historically has been the case. Even as a psychologist, most of the psychologists out there really have a very limited understanding of ego because it isn't taught. Right. Going back to your question, or taught in a very comprehensive and detailed way, but going back to the previous question about the better opportunities that exist, I think that as we come to better understand ourselves with regard to the egoic part of our consciousness and our ego unconsciousness, which is what I talk about in the book, to me that's a very important door that we have to get to help open up other doors, including being more receptive and living our divinity, living our divine self, and awakening spiritually.
Okay, so this is the book that Dr. Nickolas Martin created, and it's The Ego Unmasked, Meeting the Greatest Challenge of Your Life. So this is, explain to the viewers, is this strictly about the ego, or did Reverend Martin here have some influence on some of the content in this, or do the two of you plan on putting a book together in the near future that blends the two together?
Well, it's started out being mainly about the ego, but as I went forward in my work, you become to understand that there are other forces at work, including the divine self, our spiritual being, that are being impacted. And as time went forward and as I wrote the book, I began to see more and more of the role of this in the life of a person. And so it kind of changed as it went forward, and I began to have a broader appreciation of the linkage between the ego self and the divine self. And it also impressed me that for many people out there, the difficulties that they were experiencing in their ego self were also having a ripple effect upon their spiritual well-being, that it was creating distance, and I call distortion, in how they understand God, particularly the God within.
It's interesting. And it's nice to know that you have personal experience. You say for 32 years you've seen, now whether it be a trend that you have seen from back 32 years ago till now, have you seen any types of trends that have happened within your work, or are people exactly the same as what they were, but you view them differently because of your own growth?
Well, the word trend, I think I view them differently. I think that this is a consciousness. I think for the most part, most people tend to be ego unconscious. They're not really aware of how their ego is affecting their lives in the way they think, the way they feel, the way they act, and even their physiology, the physical part of our being. And that this continues to be a very large part of what's going on for many people out there, that they're ego unconscious. And the title, The Ego Unmasked, is really a metaphor for saying, bringing us from ego unconsciousness to ego consciousness. So we're just moving it in the right direction. We're just putting forth a map that goes from how do you go from this ego unconsciousness, Dr. Martin, you're talking about, to something called ego consciousness. And going back to the other part of your question, do you foresee another book? And that book that we are planning on writing is called Ego and Spirituality, the Consciousness of Ego Spiritualism, which really tries to talk more directly about the linkage between those two aspects of our being, our humanity and our divinity.
Great. So with the spirituality, we talked about ego and the progression, or the different way that Dr. Martin has viewed it from 32 years ago till now. Have you seen any differences in spirituality within your practices over the past several years that you've been practicing?
Well, what I tend to see is in working with people is that the ego does get in the way. And what I mean by that is the ego is housed in our emotional mental body, where we carry a lot of the baggage that we bring with us. And in order for people to truly feel their divinity, and that means moving beyond feelings of unworthiness, moving beyond feelings that the insecurities and the things that people tend to carry with them that prevents them from stepping into their light, their truth, their connection to who they really are. That's what we work with to try to clear out, to get to the core of the matter for people, is what's housed in the ego, what they're carrying there in that emotional mental body.
Right.
That prevents them from moving into their truth.
Right. You know, just to add a note here, in my personal practice, I started to do some hypnotherapy in the last patient of the day from like 4 o'clock to 5, and my schedule with that is filling up relatively quickly because people really want to heal, and offering them the option of healing through traditional medicine with prescriptions and stuff like that and counseling, in comparison to getting to the root of the problem within their ego mind and within their spirit, because I think all is connected. And what I'm finding is, and what I've known, but I'm seeing this through experience now, is that as the individuals do the work and they go deep within to get rid of some of this baggage that they've been holding that you're speaking of, the physicalness heals, and so does the spiritualness. So if they have hated God because of something that happened to them as a child, they carry this physical ailment depending upon what chakra it's associated with. And if you can clear that, and the best tool that I know right now is hypnotherapy. And most people recognize it and they're okay with it. But another form is energy work also. And people don't quite understand this type of a practice. But you know, with this show, I've been trying to bring different disciplines and facets of not just humanity, but the sciences that prove that everything around us is energy. And to try to put it all together and get little pieces to the puzzle to put it together so people have a light bulb that goes on and says, hey, oh wow, okay, so we are all energy, we are the mind-body-spirit connection, so we're looking at the whole thing. So if a person comes in to me and they're presenting with a physical ailment, or if they're having anxiety, depression, what's the true underlying cause is what I look at. And I look at the mind, the body, and the spirit. And it has totally changed my practice by looking at the holistic approach. And so what I'd like to ask both of you, and I'll start with Dr. Martin, if somebody comes into you and because you're a psychologist and your specialty is psychology, and you see a physical ailment, are you more likely to, or let me just ask you this way, who are you more likely to send this particular person to for this physical ailment? And one thing that I got to say also is it depends on the person's belief. So I guess you would have to use your own discernment about where this person is in their spirituality and their ego mind that allows them to heal in whatever direction they choose. You know what I'm saying?
I think in the traditional environment that psychologists practice within, they would tend to focus more on, first of all, the mentalistic, and if they had a, quote, suspicion that there was a physiological linkage to it, I believe they would be ethically required to send that individual to the physician to rule out any particular medically or physiologically based reason first, and then perhaps upon discovering that there isn't a basis from that standpoint, they can then look in another direction. Okay.
Are you more open now to sending them to maybe the traditional physician, and then secondarily, once they get the metabolic cleared, part of their physiology, would you may possibly send them somewhere else also, if they're open to it?
If they were open to it, a lot of times when in the again, traditional psychological practice, you probably are not getting too far into a person's spiritual background or spiritual belief system, and as a result, that alternative may not be, at least at this point in the work that people do, an alternative they go toward. But I can foresee, as we develop this understanding of the synergistic effects of the mind, the body, and the spirit, that becomes a more acceptable an appropriate direction that they would go toward.
So do you feel that there's a legality that prevents people at this particular time? I mean, in other words, ethically you say, and legally, you have the responsibility to send this person for their physical ailment to a person who deals with physical things. And mainstream medicine and the AMA and all these other people require, otherwise you could lose your license, you could have disciplinary upon yourself. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. When you asked the question initially, that was the first thought that came into my head. We have to play the game at times of making sure that we're legally appropriate as well as professionally appropriate. And so, yes, I think that, and unfortunately sometimes there may be examples we can't go to here where that is overdone. And we have to practice almost defensively when we understand that really the answers are probably not in this direction, they're probably in other places, but we have to go through that location, we have to go through that option first before we go on.
So within my practice, it's of course I practice mainstream medicine, and we roll out all the metabolic things that could be causing this physical ailment, but if they're still having it, the brain will perceive. Just for example, if I had a patient that had a below-the-knee amputation, they still feel pain in their toes, but they don't have toes. It's that what they call phantom pain. So the brain perceives, even though it's not physically there. So I really think that the brain is underlooked also.
One of the things I talk about in my book are a term called engrams, where these are, in our brain, these are physiological representations of our experiences. And so when the person had their leg amputated, the pain was probably still stored as an engram in their mind, even though the source of it, the part of the body that used to cause it, isn't physically there. It's still there up in the brain.
So do you think, like for instance, since we're talking about this subject, do you feel that there's any way that a person could heal through energy work or through that chakra center to alleviate that type of pain, the phantom pain?
I think what that is the fact that we have an etheric body that is a blueprint of our physical body. And so when you move a part of the physical body, that part is still in the etheric body, and that is energy, and that is what the person is feeling. And so in energy work, we are working with the etheric body. So definitely that pain that can be helped, and it can the person working with their own mind, their own brain, can also help to send messages to the part of the body that is there or no longer there anymore. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how one helps develop their ego-spiritualistic consciousness, and how people can live this as well. And we'll be back.
Good job.
Look, it's a giraffe.
I don't see it.
The less art kids get, the more it shows. Are yours getting enough? Art. Ask for more. AmericansForTheArts.org.
Blood isn't just needed in a disaster. Fact is, every 2 seconds, somebody in America needs blood. Please consider becoming a regular donor with the American Red Cross. You can help save more Camille's, Mallory's, Lizzie's, and Becky's. Call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE for an appointment. Who knows how many will be saved by you?
It starts with one person with a desire to serve. They join with others across the nation, citizen soldiers on a mission to protect and defend country and community. Most serve 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year to become part of something greater than themselves. Can you see yourself in this picture? Call 1-800-GO-GUARD or visit www.1800GoGuard.com. In the Army National Guard, you can.
Welcome back to Universal Talk. We have Dr. Martin and Reverend Martin here speaking about ego-spiritualistic consciousness. And we're going to talk a little bit the second half of the show in regards to how one develops that and how do they live it. And I'm going to start with Reverend Martin on this one.
Well, in order to develop ego-spiritualistic consciousness, one has to be open to understand that they are more than what they have known themselves to be.
Okay.
And usually typically, I'll give an example, when somebody comes to see me, we talk about where they want to go. And through this conversation, we can sometimes see the parts of them that may have been holding them back. And these are the human parts of them. I think to get to the spiritualistic consciousness that most people want to strive to get to, that's already there. That's already in place. We are all spiritual beings. We are all we need to be. But the problem is many people think they need to strive to be this spiritual being. They already are. Mm-hmm. It's the things that are in their way that prevent them from seeing that. Mm-hmm. And that's the things that are housed within the ego. And those are the things that need to be known. Those are the secrets that people need to allow to flow up so that they can move into a healing process.
So do you feel that, speaking of energy, do you think that there are various blocks that could block the energy flow that prevent a person from a certain experience?
Yes, and what's interesting, the wonderful thing about this book is that it helps people to maybe see why things are blocked within them. It gives the different ego types that somebody can look at the book, find from reading their ego type, you know, this describes me, this is exactly how, you know, I've been living my life. And once we have awareness, awareness is the key to stepping through a new door. You know, it's the key to being able to see with clarity. And when you can see the ego type that you are, you may be able to see why you've been doing things a certain way, why you're not letting go of what's obvious to others, but you know, you still hold on to this issue or this, you know, block that whatever's in you.
Right, and some of the problem, I guess you would say, was with the ego is you don't want to admit to yourself that even if they read this book and said, yep, this is me, 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 oh, wait a minute. They might deny the fact that this block is due to something that really is for them, because we've been taught in this culture almost to put up a guard and not accept responsibility for some of the things that we've done. And I think that it would be important also to say to the viewers is, if you are going to work on the ego, and this, again, is a very good book to do this because it hits on all the ego types. I mean, how many pages did you say this?
Well, the book is 758 pages total. It's a pretty comprehensive book. It doesn't leave anybody out.
But you didn't leave anybody out.
Or
That's
anybody
the important
behind.
thing. Right. So, if a person is going to work on their ego, and I think that's the first step, really, is to open the mind, the ego mind. And a lot of times people get mind and ego mixed up, but it's actually ego-mind. Would you?
I would say ego and human are very synonymous, and I say this at the website. It's the same title of the book, where I describe helping people better understand what are we talking about, and to make it a more relevant understanding what ego is. It's really just being human. Our ego self is our human self. Our nature is our ego nature,
right.
And so on. If I have a chance, I'd like to go back to your initial question about what ego spiritualism is and how can we develop that. I think, first of all, it's a new term. There's no term out there where the two words are actually together without a hyphen, without a separation, because it's a unique form of consciousness which actually blends two different awakenings, two different consciousness, one being the ego consciousness, awakening on the egoic level, which is a very major focus, obviously, of the book, but also the awakening that takes place on the spiritual level. It's sort of working with them together, in which our human self and our divine self are merging progressively, and we are living the awarenesses and the awakening of those two aspects of our being in very healthy ways.
Right. You know, what's important about that is, as I'm processing what you're saying, I'm thinking of the mind-body-spirit connection. But if you take care of the ego and the spiritual together and you have an awareness, the rest follows, because you can recognize the body and the physical ailment that is within. And as you know, each chakra center of the body, and wherever the ailment is within that particular area of the body, you can take a look at a more thorough approach and say, oh, well, I'm having this issue here in this part of my body, so what does that symbolize within energy work? And then if you work it out through energy, you can say, oh my gosh, that's true. That's exactly what I'm dealing with. So if it was in the solar plexus or in the gut region, it might be some issues with self-esteem. And a lot of people are amazed to realize that when they do the research, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I'm dealing with. So, go ahead.
John, I want to give you an example, just tying it exactly with what you were talking about. About 10 years ago, there was a man who wrote a book on back pain, and I forget his name. I think he was out of New York, but he looked at tons of scans of people that complained of having back pain, and a lot of these scans were pretty normal. There wasn't anything wrong, but they had back pain. And then he went further and looked into the issue and found that a lot of these people were really dealing with unresolved anger and resentment kind of issues. So here was a very prevalent example of where the mind was really, because it wasn't being addressed at that level, the body was taking it on, and the disease was developing as a result.
You know, in the physical part of it, when I see patients that come in with back pain and we do an x-ray and we do an MRI and everything, you know, ends up being normal, sometimes they have the worst pain, whereas some of the people that I see with MRIs that have either a slip disc or a herniated disc and, you know, spondylolisthesis and all these other ailments of the spine, and they don't have hardly any pain. You know, they may have had it for that initial moment that they came in for, like a motor vehicle accident, and incidentally we found it, and then within a couple weeks they have no pain. But they still have that issue because it just doesn't heal, you know, physically on its own without surgery. So this all ties in together, the mind-body-spirit connection.
Well, going back to before the break, we were talking about the legal aspects of it, and there's a lot of turf and territory-related matters and a lot of money, insurance companies, pharmaceutical industry, you can go further and further into that, but the point is they maybe often want it to be a medical, physical problem. And not a spiritual problem, not a mental problem, a spiritual problem, I mean a physical problem, because they can sell medicine and they can get insurance and do those other aspects to keep people at a distance from moving on to the holistic message, which is what we're talking about here, that there are other places to look at that could be the source of their discomfort.
What do you, Reverend Martin, what do you think the block is with that? Why do you think that we as humanity and as a culture are blocked from researching other avenues, or we're ridiculed for, why would you go to that witch doctor type of a thing?
It's been learned. It's been learned. I mean, if you're familiar with maybe how we were before the society we live in we were more intuitive beings way, way back when. But as the society that we have built, that we're living in now, has grown, it's just what's been taught, what's been learned, and wanting to follow, you know, a conformed way of thinking. And so now we're kind of expanding. We're expanding beyond that now, and so it's still new. This energy work, this moving beyond the 5 senses, moving beyond our 3D dimension is still kind of new to some people, and new things frighten people. And it just takes time. We just have to be patient and gentle, and it takes time.
Do you think that a reliance on technology has anything to do with it? Or not taking the responsibility for themselves? I mean, there's two concepts that are raised in my mind right now, is that when patients come in to me, they want me to tell them what they should do.
Yes.
I give them options and they say, well, you tell me. So they don't take the responsibility for their own health care, and they also want to rely on a pill to, for instance, if they have high cholesterol, I give them the option of, for the first 3 months, what I want you to do is eat these types of foods, exercise every day, and rest, and take care of yourself, and see if this comes back to normalcy. If it doesn't, then yes, you require a medication. Where a lot of the people say, no, I'm not going to do that, just give me the pill. I'll just take the pill. I'm lazy, and they're honest, at least they're honest, but the responsibility is not there. So do you see that in your practice?
Yes, many people, again, it's what we've been taught, and it's moving away from their own responsibility, moving away from their own divinity.
Their own power, would you say?
Their own power, yes. They've lost that. They've lost that. Our society kind of took hold, and you have to do things this way, you have to do things that way. The church, I have to say, does that a lot, and it trains people to not be able to think for themselves. How many people have that thought of, I have to get to church every Sunday, I have to. And it's sad to think that that power has been taken away from them.
Joe, I want to throw something out, tying in again with what we're talking about here. There's a concept in my book called mental medicine. And mental medicine is basically reality-based thinking and ego-related awareness that applies to your particular ego type. It doesn't cost anything to work with that. The medical community, at least the traditional medical community, is not going to like that, because if that somehow is found to be more effective and more powerful, and I do believe that you can't prescribe a pill that's going to change the way a person thinks, that's causing them a lot of difficulty in their life. It's something you have to go after, dealing with your ego and the way you're thinking in less reality-based or non-reality-based ways about yourself and about the world and about God, things that a pill can never fix. And yet that's the issue we're running into, or could run into.
Right. I agree with you on that aspect. One thing I'd like to say, though, is in my practice, there are medications that we use for anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all of them. And we do give them medication that it brings everything to what they consider. I had a patient come in yesterday that says, I feel normal again, thank you for this pill. But as soon as you take the pill away, all the symptoms come back. They truly didn't heal. And I don't want to say it's masking the symptoms, but to truly heal within, the person has to have an ability to trust in themselves and have that power and take on that responsibility. And in our culture today, not many people do that. So I'm faced with the discernment of, is this person ready to deal with this internally, or is it better to simply write the prescription? So having a new awareness is pretty difficult to practice medicine, because both ends of the spectrum, but the key variable is the individual you're treating that's right before you has to take on the responsibility. So I give them the option, and I explain to them and say, okay, this is mainstream medicine, this is alternative therapy, or complementary, or healing within is the way I like to put it. We can do one or the other, or we can blend the two. How do you want to proceed?
Joe, it sounds like what you're telling me as a physician, the question you have is, am I going to treat the symptom, or am I going to treat the problem? And they're not often the same thing. The symptom could be you take a pill, it takes away some of the anxiety-related symptoms. And by the way, we do need medications in some cases to help people. That should not be said.
Right.
We do need them, but we cannot present them as the answer to everything and all things, and in many cases they don't treat the problem, they treat the symptom. And if people really want to treat the problem, they have to go further and deal with things in other areas, such as the mental and spiritual well-being of their lives.
The issue with that is the legality that we talked about earlier. And the way I present it within my practice, and it's a private practice, is the options. So every person should have the God-given right to have their own choice in their own spirituality, their health care, the way they live their life. And so I offer them, these things are what's out there. This is what I have come to be aware of. And so I'm going to give you the option of these ways of treatment. And I specifically say that this particular pill is going to help you, and it'll probably make you feel really well, considering what you're feeling right now. But if you truly want to get to the root of it and you want to heal the underlying problem, the better aspect or the better way or tool is either hypnotherapy, Reiki energy, or just energy work. I hate to use the word Reiki specifically. It is a specific energy, but there are all other kind of energies.
So much more. Reiki. The Reiki is usually where people start, I think. And it's wonderful,
right.
But it really, there's so much to expand beyond energy. And what we're talking about here, people seeking something outside of themselves to get well, it all comes back to that feeling of separateness that people in our society feel, and it's that separateness from the source of which they came from. It's that disconnection within them. And again, that's what part of healing is. That's what energy work is about, is that making that connection, bringing it all back, and bringing it all back to the source of creation,
right.
which we are all have within us.
Right. One thing that we could consider is this unity consciousness, and we're all one, and everything's connected. Everything around us all is energy, and it's blending, it's connecting. And sometimes, like you say, the separateness, people feel lonely and depressed because they're separated from, they separate themselves from source, and not just source, but everybody else, which we could consider source, really.
Right, exactly.
We're all one. And you wouldn't cut your arm off because it's a part of you. But if you truly realize that everybody else, you wouldn't do something harmful to you or anybody else,
yes.
if we knew wholeheartedly and believed. So a lot of what we talk about here in this discussion has to do with each individual person's belief system. So the most important thing I think of to start this type of work with ego or the mind, body, spirit is the openness. Open your mind and don't be so closed off to say, oh, that's, I'm going to stick right with here. And one other variable is fear that's been instilled into the population of, you got to live this one lifetime, get it right, or you're going to hell. So it's a heaven or hell thing. It's a choice. It's one or the other. There is no, well, there's purgatory too in some particular religions. So, you get the mediocre ride too afterwards to, suffer for a while. But what do you say to people that have the belief, and there's a high percentage of people that have the particular belief that it's a heaven or hell, it's a one lifetime deal, and get it right, or that's it.
Everybody is entitled to believe what they feel comfortable believing.
Right.
But it's to tell you the truth, most people that I see are not that black and white, because I just don't really see too many people that have those beliefs. But it is about trying to step beyond that which you've always known, and understanding that maybe there is a little bit more than what the box that I've just been living in. But that's very fearful for people, and so it's helping to alleviate their fears as much as possible, helping them to understand that just because they open their mind a little bit doesn't mean they're walking through a new door. It's just learning, maybe a little bit more, expanding on a little bit more than what they know. Some of what can maybe really help people is interpreting the Bible in the way it was truly meant to be interpreted. It's been misunderstood and taken literally in many ways, and the Bible's really a beautiful writing of metaphysical works in many ways, and having them understand what that's really talking about can help alleviate some fears.
Do you find that people have difficulty with change?
Yes, I do. And it's one of the 10 key life areas I list in the book, dealing with change in life, developmental change and situational change and technological change. We all have to come to terms with that, because that's one aspect of life that our ego has to deal with, is the idea of dealing with change. And it's just a constant in all of our lives, and the healthier our ego is, the more in balance our ego is, the more it can deal with those different changes in ways that aren't about fear, but that are about progressiveness and dealing with them effectively. I did want to take a shot at the question you asked about hell. And my personal belief is there is no hell after this particular life. If there is any hell, the hell is existent in this life. life. And that hell is probably the distance that people may live in their ego unconsciousness, depending how far they are in terms of their ego fragility, their ego permeability, or their ego size from the balance point. And just adding one other thought, you hear the concept of devil and hell kind of work together a lot. And the more I've read and the more I understand about this concept, the more I begin to really realize that the devil is just the makings of our ego unconsciousness. And if we are successful in moving our ego unconsciousness into a ego conscious state and in balance, the devil is defeated, the devil is dissolved, the devil is disowned. Not our ego, which as some people might suggest may happen, but no, it's that part of us. It's like it's a non-existent aspect of our life. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Do you think that duality has something to do with the angels and the devil, or God and the devil, hot, cold, all these types of things that we live in a three-dimensional term, or three-dimensional awareness? The yin and the yang symbol with the balance of good and evil. And do you feel that all of these concepts are more of an internal thing? So when you balance the two, the blending of the two, whether it be the ego and the spirit, that it's dissolved, like you say.
It can be. You can come into that balanced state. The ego can overtake you with the fears, and those fears do become real. People can create living energy entities from their own fears. And so it's not something to say, well, it isn't real. It is real. We create our own reality. I mean, we do. Jesus wrestled with the devil, when he was up out in seclusion for that period of time, but really what he was wrestling with was the ego, his ego talking to him. If you are the Son of God, can you not do this? Those were the things, excuse me, that he was wrestling with. And that's what the devil is for so many people. But people, again, want to look outside of themselves and not take the responsibility of what is within them that needs healed.
Absolutely. I really think that, it's hard to say that certain things do not exist at all, because actually what I believe is within each person's belief system, like you say, if you truly and wholeheartedly believe in it, it manifests before you. So to try maybe to do more of a blending of the mind, body, spirit on a holistic way is probably the best way of living and bringing it back to the now, because when you get too far into the future, things get really fearful and scary because you try to control and account for everything that's going to happen or transpire. Whereas if you're living moment by moment and just live with what's right before you, things become a little more pleasant and maybe easier to live life that way. But as far as the angels and the hell and the devil and stuff like that, at one time, in my awareness right now, because I look at it from a different viewpoint, I don't see it as an existence for me personally, but I do recognize that people do manifest these types of things, and it is an awareness at a certain level of being.
Joe, when you describe the heaven or hell concept, the angels, devils concept, these are almost like boundaries, extreme boundaries. And one of the statements that as part of our discussion of ego spiritualism is the idea that you don't have to be anywhere else but here. You don't have to be anybody else but you, and you don't have to be any other time but now. Those all represent that balance, that imbalanced being of a person, so that they don't have to be consumed with being other places or being before, going on, other places. And that's just the nature of what I believe our ego spiritualism can get to when we are in balance and live that healthy balance between our humanity and our divinity.
Right. Great. Okay, so we have about a little less than 10 minutes left, and I would like to give you both the opportunity to maybe talk about what your message is, and is there anything that we did not cover today that you would like to talk about the ego consciousness? And of course we're representing the mind, the body, the spirit with our specialties and our disciplines that we do here, and we're giving feedback to the viewers of within our expertise what we see and what we deal with in a day-to-day basis. But What message would you like to give to the world today? And I'll start with Reverend Martin.
I would like to I guess, send out the message that we are all one, even though we have our different beliefs, our different styles, our different ways of doing things. In the end, we all are one. We all come from the same source. We are each creators of our life in every moment of each day. We are the creator, and how we think, how we move about our day, brings into reality that which we are thinking. If we are seeking outside of ourselves for answers, for solutions, for healing, then we are avoiding what really needs to be looked at. First, coming into understanding who we are as human beings, that comes into knowing the ego. That comes into knowing what is within our emotional mental body. Most of us live our lives through our emotional mental body, which houses the ego personality. That's what we present into the world. When we can come into understanding where we are with this and helping that to move into a more balanced state, it allows us to awaken to the truth within us, which is that we are divine beings. We are one and the same as the creator that we came from. And so, we can all move into a new awareness at our own time, in our own space, and not be fearful of change any longer.
I agree, we need to go within and we need to face the baggage or the cellular memories from whether it be this life or past lives. But do you think it's important to also be open to different teachers that come into your path to show you something about yourself? I don't want the message to get out there that everybody just has to go within and that's the best way to do it, when really, like, they could go to someone like you or someone like Nick because there's certain aspects of ourselves that we need help with because we can't see it with our own blockage per se.
We all need teachers. We're all here to be together, to work together. So definitely we all need teachers. We can't go sit up on a mountaintop and just, some people can, but for the most part we need teachers. We need to, and I feel when you're moving with the flow of what life presents to you, the right teacher will come at the right time. You don't have to stay with the same teacher through your whole life. You will move, you will grow, you will change. And the right teacher will always be presented for each one of us at the right time.
Awesome.
In conjunction with that comment, there's one of the ego components I talk about is ego permeability, which is really the flexibility of our ego, the ability to be flexible and to not just go with what we already know, but to be receptive to new and different things that could take us beyond where we're at. That's one of the aspects of a healthy ego, is it being in balance with regard to its degree of permeability. And in a real life experience of that, I started out contemplating ego from more or less the psychological, scientific vantage point. And I was open to the messages that I heard from Linda over time that allowed that book to be transformed to a better book and a better, more powerful message that was able to integrate both the divinity and the humanity aspects of our being. Going to the question you asked earlier about what message, I think the message that I would like to put out, both on an individual basis and on a larger world type basis, is that the path of evolution, the path of growth moves from ego unconsciousness to ego consciousness, that we don't just jump or go beyond our ego unconsciousness into spiritual awakening and spiritual consciousness. That message has been out there for thousands of years, and unfortunately we look at humanity and where we're at in terms of our situation. If I brought up the concept of world peace, people would probably laugh at me because they would think that's just never going to be able to happen. And they're right, it would never happen as long as we stay at an ego unconsciousness that permeates most of the world that we live in. However, if we are able to move beyond that ego unconsciousness into ego consciousness and work with it individually and collectively to bring it into balance, the doors get open to then knowing and more deeply experiencing and living our spirituality, our divine self, and then we move forward and we completely fulfill what we're potentially able to be. And that's something we can do on both an individual level and on a collective societal level. I think that's the path of evolution. And the very last thing I want to say is, if somebody were to ask me, if about ego spiritualism and world peace, my response would be, it would have to be. It would be if you understand what ego spiritualism is about, it would have to exist, because as a humanity, we would have evolved further beyond where we're at this point.
Great. Okay, so we got a couple minutes left, and I'd like to give you the opportunity to leave the listeners with any thoughts.
Well, the best thought I have would be to get the book, The Ego Unmasked, Meeting the Greatest Challenge of Your Life.
And here it is again, The Ego Unmasked, Meeting the Greatest Challenges of Your Life by Dr. Nickolas Martin. Where can he pick this up? Or could the patients?
Well, it's available via Dorrance Publishing and .com, but also it's available at Amazon.com. But there's a website that I would like to encourage the viewer to go to, just to learn a little bit more about what we're talking about and get a little more understanding, and that is called theegounmasked.com. If you go there, there's plenty of information, including who the audiences are for the book, the different consciousnesses which we referred to today, the meaning of the word ego and what it means, and also there's also presentations that Linda and I do in conjunction with our work.
Great. Okay. And for the viewers out there that want more of Universal Talk, tune into my radio talk show Friday, November 26th from 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time by simply logging on to www.universaltalk.info. We'll be discussing Montauk and its implications with Peter Moon. Thank you all for tuning into our show. If you like the show or dislike the show, any other suggestions of content for future shows, email me at universaltalking@gmail.com. Or if you missed the show or some of the show and you'd like to see more of the content, please refer to my website at www.universaltalk.info. And this is Joe Marra signing off for Universal Talk.